Look, up in the release schedule!
It's a 4K scan!
It's a new Blu-ray! It's the Warner Studio label. Faster than a speeding mastering process. More powerful than a boutique label. Able to cut corners in a single bound. This amazing incompetence from a studio label. The label of stupid. Warner Home Entertainment. Possessed of an amazing lack of care, the Warner Studio label fights a never-ending battle for true incompetence. Disguised as a mild-mannered studio entity behind crap disc releases. Warner Home Video.
Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This video is a review of the new Blu-ray release from the Warner Studio label of the iconic landmark animation titans, the original Fleischer Superman cartoons from 1941, made for Paramount, and then of course after the first 9 shorts that were done by the Fleischer Studios, it switched over to the Famous Studios after the sort of breakup of the Fleischer group, and then most of the people who were working for the Fleischers remained and did the other Famous Studios films for Paramount to round out the series. These are cartoons that need no introduction. They are among the greatest animation ever produced. I myself have always regarded them as what I feel personally is the greatest in animation history. And these are, for me, the definitive adaptation of the Man of Steel. These are what made me a Superman fan. These are some of the images that changed my life growing up. And I would watch the shorts over and over and over on the multitudes of horrible public domain VHS copies, which of course I still have my various cartoon compilation tapes. Because these fell into the public domain. So they have been kicked around for decades. They have been stuck in video hell ever since. And even to the point where you get covers that look so abominably bad as this one from Good Times Home Video in the 1980s. And of course they're using whatever prints they could get their hands on. And the quality is, to say it is beyond poor does not even begin to get into it. And they're filled with splices and they're totally off in their color and they're too dark or they're washed out. So even getting them on an official release in the first place was something to celebrate. But unfortunately, they have gone through many different iterations and only really 2 attempts at a sort of restoration from Warner Brothers themselves. And the first go-around was really, shall we say, mixed and had a lot of problems baked into them due to something that is unfortunately very common to Warner and is not a new problem, which is their very poor to non-existent quality control back then, and that was in 2006. So now they have decided to go back to the well again and finally try to bring the Fleischer cartoons into the HD realm. It's no secret that this release is not what it should be, and there's already been a great deal of discussion online since the first couple reviews started trickling in, but it wasn't until I was able to get my hands on a copy of this and then having to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and go through each and every one of the 17 shorts and really study them very closely to see if any of the audio errors from the 2006 master that was done for the DVDs had been addressed, and what new things may have been done in this process. This new release is advertised as being from a 4K scan of the original negatives and then put through the Warner Brothers Technicolor alignment process, which is their very meticulous, painstaking process of recombining the separate Technicolor elements to have perfect registration, which is a very expensive and time-consuming process to do, and has brought new life into many classic Warners and other films that are under the Warner library that, for example, the Warner Archive has put out. And so you're able to get rid of color fringing and achieve better alignment, ostensibly, than what was originally there. Now, this was a release you would think would have been a Warner Archive title. And I think this is probably the ultimate case in point in the difference between the Warner Studio label and the Warner Archive division. Every time the Warner Archive has had it open for fan requests, or you could submit things, this was always my number one request for the Warner Archive to do, because these are not just the gold standard for Superman, but the gold standard for animation. And they perfectly convey the spirit of the Siegel-Schuster Golden Age Superman, and of course added to the Superman mythos by adding certain elements that were not there in Golden Age Superman, most notably the actual ability to fly. That was not there before the Fleischer cartoons, because of course it looked really silly, him just leaping over constant buildings. So the importance of these can't be denied, and I think that's probably why the studio division decided they were going to do this, and they have now done this with a good number of animation titles that otherwise would have been done by the Warner Archive to their usual standards of having a proper disc release with proper compression, proper encoding, and actually trying to make sure that there weren't any grievous errors in the release and actually doing their due diligence. When the Hanna-Barbera library started getting new scans and being restored title by title, those have been handled in a mixed sort of way. And the ones that the Archive Division has done are all wonderful releases that are exactly what they should be. Case in point, their release of the classic, iconic Johnny Quest series is, I think, one of the finest Blu-rays ever made. When the studio takes over one of the bigger Hanna-Barbera titles, and most notably they did this with the iconic original Scooby-Doo series, they produce an appallingly bad Blu-ray release that had no reason to be that way. It was simply due to their incompetence. That release has horrible compression, is shoved onto single-layer Blu-ray discs, and was put into an overpriced swag box set that had no real purpose other than inflating the price point, had lossy audio, and if the compression problems weren't enough, it had been actually hit with a pass of digital noise reduction and had grain removal. And that made that release really kind of pointless, and I've never actually upgraded to it because I didn't feel like investing in a release that was pointless. And on top of that, the source scan itself was the best we'd ever seen and was so compromised by the Warner Studio label's incompetence that, again, it essentially ruined the release. And if that wasn't bad enough, the streaming versions that were available on some sites seemed to have been before the DNR pass was applied. So if you had a streaming service and you were looking at it, some streaming services had a prior version of this same master that actually looked better than the disc release because, of course, it didn't have the DNR pass applied to it and actually had more of the original grain structure intact. So this is not something they are doing in isolated cases, but they've done it on all of these animation titles they've handled. This has also happened in the DCAU. The Warner Archive released the feature film Mask of the Phantasm, and it sold out almost immediately, which made the studio label sit up and take notice, and they handled the release of Batman the Animated Series, which I have reviewed on this channel, and if you've seen my review of that release is fraught with problems that have never been addressed, never been corrected, and makes that release, even though it has this new scan and it's technically far beyond what the old DVDs of the broadcast masters are, it's still hideously flawed, and it has all of the problems that we're going to discuss here in terms of there are errors throughout, there are audio errors. That release has defective audio on several episodes that was only corrected for streaming and has never been officially addressed. It had terrible compression, and it had an unnecessary DNR pass on it, which really made the overall image degraded from the original scan, in addition to having new color timing that differed significantly from the original broadcast masters, which were specifically color timed at the time of broadcast to be within the confines of broadcast television standards at the time. So if you look at it from a color perspective, you've also got the notion of, well, there is definitely some revisionism here because it's not exactly what the original broadcast master was. Those two examples, Batman the Animated Series and the original Scooby-Doo series, being handled by the studio label, who apparently has zero quality control and zero care for integrity of maintaining the original look and sound of films, and especially animation, are, I think, perfect to highlight how different the two factions within the Warner umbrella operate, and the Warner Archive shows up the studio label division at every turn. So the announcement that the studio label was going to be doing the Fleischer cartoons made me, a bit trepidatious, to say the least. But I at the very least, hoped that this would address some of the flaws of Warner's first go-round with the shorts. And for that, I should probably explain a little bit, just in a sort of Cliff Notes way, about the sort of video history of the Fleischer cartoons in a very brief form, mainly highlighting around the major couple releases. So to start, as I mentioned before, the shorts were only available in all kinds of multitudes of crappy public domain editions, from terrible prints that were almost always incomplete, in horrible quality. And as a kid, you just collected tapes, and one might have a short mixed in with other cartoons, or one might have two or three, and you wound up usually having a big stack of random tapes of public domain cartoons just to have all the different Superman shorts. And that's just how it was, until the first couple of attempts at trying to present something that was better started happening. And the two major ones, the first was done by Image Entertainment back in, I believe it was 1988, which was done for their Laserdisc release. And then that actually got a port to DVD, which I have here, which is under the title of The Superman Cartoons of Max and Dave Fleischer. Now, this was taken directly from the best available prints they had, and of course the Laserdisc and the DVD as well does have a PCM mono soundtrack. This is still a pretty solid way to see the shorts, but of course, because they're print transfers and the work dates back to the late 1980s, the quality does leave a lot to be desired, and because they're transferring from prints directly, they're not fully pristine, and they are going to have defects and damage, and the audio is going to be a bit noisy and have pops and ticks and things. So they are what they are, but it basically gives you a time capsule from the late 80s of some print scans. Now, a little while later, in 1991, Bosko Video produced a new set of masters from the best available 35mm prints they could source at the time, and this was done for a VHS release. It was on 2 VHS tapes, so it's actually a 2-volume VHS set. And this actually, even though it's for VHS, is of much higher quality than the image scans. This also was ported to DVD, which I have here. This is the Bosko Diamond Anniversary Collection DVD, which is from that original VHS master. This, of course, being much higher quality visually because it's on a DVD. But both of these, when you put them in, it still has the same original program notes dating it to 1988 and 1991, respectively. But, of course, these are relatively available, and you don't have to have a Laserdisc player or a VCR to enjoy them. So this still remains, I think, the Bosko version as the best overall direct, warts and all, hands-off transfer and presentation of the original shorts, because they were taken directly from the best surviving 35mm prints that could be found at the time, and again, done straight as is. So you are, like the image release, going to encounter some print flaws and anomalies and some noise in the soundtrack and things, because this is, like I said, it's basically a warts and all presentation. It's just the overall quality is so much higher than the image release that for years this has been the version that I recommend people go to, because it doesn't have any errors in the actual transfers either, in terms of picture and sound errors as well, and it gives you a nice, again, time capsule stamped as is. This is how these prints were at the time. They're not perfect, but this is the best overall presentation of how these shorts were. The only issue really with this, well, there's really two, I should say. One, for some reason at Bosko Video, it was decided that at the start of each short, the original release date is actually superimposed in a little bit of white text at the bottom. That's a little annoying and unfortunate, but it doesn't ruin the quality of the short, and it's only at the very beginning of each of them. But that's, of course, one thing you're going to notice. And then the other is one of the shorts, Terror on the Midway, has always been in really poor shape and is quite dark in a lot of places, and really washed out on a lot, if not, well, pretty much all of the older releases before Warner Home Video's first go-round in 2006. So you will have to deal with that short in particular always looking really bad on all the older releases, because I guess it just didn't exist in a higher quality print for people to access. So the Image release and the Bosko release, whether you have the originals or the DVD ports, were the best of all of the other editions. A couple years later, VCI did their own DVD, but it's now not as good as either of the Image or Bosko discs. I've seen it, I've just never owned a copy of it before, but it's probably like the third best of these. So it's still okay, but it's nowhere near as good as these, and the Bosko is head and shoulders above all the others. So that's how it stood until 2006, when Warner Brothers decided they were going to do their own new version and new master of the Fleischer cartoons, and they did it for an extras program, unfortunately, instead of a standalone release. They released them as extras shoved into the Superman feature films collections. This is the big Ultimate Collector's Edition tin set. They were included and actually split up by the original Fleischer shorts and then the Famous Studios shorts on different discs as standard definition. And then these would later be ported to all the successive releases, including the Blu-rays. What this meant was Warner apparently scanned whatever their best source was. There was no real information about it, but it seems to be the same source they would also use it for this Blu-ray. And since that's claimed to be from negatives, I guess that's what they scanned here. But it seems to have been a very quick workflow process, and not a lot of time and money was put into it, because they're filled with damage and marks and things. But the overall quality was far beyond anything we'd ever seen, and the color timing was notably much more vivid. And of course, Terror on the Midway no longer had the print problems of the older editions, so that led most people to automatically think, well, these are head and shoulders better, and you would think so, being the studio working from their original source. However, because it was such a quick workflow process and people did a lot of things that they didn't apparently double check, this was fraught with a bunch of errors. Most of them having to do with the original opening and closing titles, because what they did was they tried to restore just one or two of the titles and then standardize them for all of the others. But you can't do that with these because they have a lot of variations in the music cues and the announcer voice, but then also some of them had custom sound effects for the title cards, and then some had custom speeches and went on longer. Particularly, for example, the second short, The Mechanical Monsters, has a special mention about Superman's X-ray vision. So the intro is a custom intro. It goes on longer. And the original short retells the origin story in the introduction. So that is also unique. And then later on in the run, there was a changeover in the opening speech. It was no longer just faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. It transitioned into the other one for the famous shorts of the mightier than the pounding surf, more powerful than the roaring hurricane. So there are variations in all the intros. And also the Paramount logos with the Paramount logo music was slightly different in some of them. But basically, most, if not all, of the shorts then had some sort of audio error in the opening and closing titles. Also, the music would be truncated and cut off. Some of the titles faded out to black early. They were just a mess because, again, someone tried to just standardize them without taking the time to actually look at the shorts themselves and realize, oh, these are all unique. You can't do that. Because I guess somebody thought it would just be easier to restore one or two of them in terms of the intros and then just repeat and copy paste. But again, you can't do that because they all have variations or unique differences. That's one thing. But then the other is that the audio sources they used seem to at least somehow stem back to the old crappy public domain transfers, because they had a lot of issues with what seemed like splices in the audio. So some of the shorts have words or lines of dialogue either clipped or missing. Again, a lot of the fades and fade outs are messed up. Again, especially at the closing of each short, they're pretty much ruined on all of these. If you go back and you watch all the old crappy public domain copies, you're going to see all this stuff. And in fact, some of the exact same errors that you see on old public domain VHS tapes from the 80s are in this Warner version, which seems really bizarre. but you would expect that from an old 80s public domain VHS tape being transferred from a print from who knows where. And a lot of, if pretty much all of these that I've ever seen before Image and Bosko did theirs, are full of these problems because they're literally just prints filled with splices and tears and damages and jumps and everything. But to then have all these audio problems on the Warner 2006 master was just strange. And if that wasn't bad enough, on top of everything, they also window boxed a lot of the credits, which means having black bar information cutting off picture by shrinking the image down and also cropping it a little bit to ostensibly make sure none of the credits are cut off, but it also limits your resolution, and was thankfully a practice that was stopped a number of years ago and only pops up sporadically. But that was another problem. And lastly, because they were extras on a DVD of a feature film with other extras on top of that, they were also compressed quite significantly. So they were shoved in on a disc with a movie and other extras, and that didn't help matters. So this was a huge leap forward in terms of quality, but you had all of these new errors that were introduced, and pretty much all the intros were screwed up, and all of the outros were screwed up now, and the audio had problems, and the credits were window boxed, and then the color timing was significantly different on a lot of the shorts compared to the direct print scans we had before, which that, makes sense to a degree because you're ostensibly accessing the original negatives this time, and they are going to look different. But some of the shorts, particularly the Underground World, seemed like they had been tweaked a bit or changed in terms of somebody thought they maybe needed to look like this instead of how they were on direct print transfers. But without having the materials to look at yourself, it's very difficult to figure out which is technically more accurate. All you can notice is that there's been a definite shift somewhere. So this was a very mixed bag, to say the least, and this began my hoping that Warner Brothers would finally address all these problems and make a definitive release of the Fleischer Superman cartoons. So this is where the clock starts in 2006, because I was so excited to see these on an official Warner release with new transfers and looking so vivid, but then all of the audio errors suddenly, they really jumped out to me, and here I was just, a teenager who had grown up seeing these and loving these since I was a little kid, and just seeing all the different versions over the years, and always hoping there would be one better, and then eventually getting the Image and Bosko and being like, wow, these are so much better than I've ever seen, and then seeing the Warner editions come out and not be given the spotlight of an individual release, being shoved on as extras, and then having all these issues and things. But outside of that, the quality was so much better that it was very frustrating. And so a lot of fan efforts sprung up to try and research these errors and maybe correct them if possible by replacing the audio tracks with older releases, the best of which is the mild-mannered edition, which managed to fix pretty much all of the Warner errors in the audio, mostly by replacing things with audio from the Bosko video release, which is still probably the best way to work with these sources. And though that edition, the mild-mannered edition, is still on YouTube, which I will link to in the description. A little while later, in about 2009, I believe it was, we got the individual reissue of Max Fleischer's Superman 1941 to 1942. What was special about this is this was a separate release of the same masters, but on two separate DVDs with the little featurettes that were done for the Superman set, and then I think the second one of the featurettes was specifically put on this release, making it exclusive. Of course, the hope was that Warner Brothers would fix and address all of the really terrible and notable audio problems that pretty much affected every single one of the 17 cartoons. Unfortunately, when this came out, they did at least address the X-ray vision intro on Mechanical Monsters. I believe that was the one major one they fixed and addressed, and then I think they may have addressed one or two of the other minor errors, if I'm remembering correctly. But it's basically they addressed one or two, and that was it, and the rest were the same. However, the really big benefit of this release is because it was done as a standalone 2 DVD set. the compression was far better, and the actual size of the actual files on the disc and the bit rate is significantly higher. And you can actually compare this standalone release to both the DVD and the Blu-ray. Well, I should say the Blu-ray, because if you're like me, you have your DVDs, and all the Superman DVDs from this era have the dreaded Warner Brothers disc rot, so I can't even view all the discs from my 10 set because they're completely rotted. But if you view the standard def cartoons ported onto the Blu-rays and you compare them directly to the standalone release, you will tell there is a noticeable visual quality difference that you can see with the naked eye on your television screen just comparing these two, because the bit rate is significantly higher and the file size is significantly higher. It's really almost, I don't know if exactly it's double the size, but it's pretty much double in terms of if you've got if you have a player that will show you the average bit rate as you're going along, you'll see the size is practically double in terms of the bit rate itself. And again, the file sizes on the discs are much larger, and Warner Brothers did fix one or two of their errors. So of the DVD master, the standalone version is far superior to either the DVD or the Blu-ray extras, even though it's still the same base master. The standalone version is much better simply from a compression and file size standpoint. So if you like the Warner DVD master, you have to get the standalone version for better picture quality. Now, this is where it stood for the shorts up until the sudden announcement that they were being brought to Blu-ray by the Warner Studio label here in 2023. There is one other outlier I'd like to mention about Warner Brothers Home Video and the Fleischer Superman cartoons before I jump into the new release, and that is the handful, I believe it's 4 volumes that were done of the TV's Best Adventures of Superman in the late 1990s, specifically 1998 to 1999. I have the first volume here on Laserdisc. These are basically compilations of the classic 50s George Reeves Superman television series, where they would take 2 random episodes and make a sort of double feature pairing, because TV series weren't commonly released on video at that time in their entirety. These are, of course, standard def, but they do have nice PCM mono soundtracks, and it's a nice sort of thing for that time in video to at least get something of the iconic series out there. And these are all late release Laserdiscs, so they're very tricky to find and usually a little bit on the pricier side. I just have this first volume, for example. But what they did to make it to add value to the package is each one of these has a random Fleischer Superman cartoon tucked somewhere, usually in the middle, like here on Volume 1, which has the original first Superman cartoon in the middle of 2 of the 50s TV series episodes. So you would think this would be just like what turned up on the 2006 Warner DVD Master. It does appear to be the same source, and it is a direct scan, so it has the same baked-in damage and things, but obviously no window box titles and things. But interestingly, and again, I can only talk about this one because I only have this one volume with the one short, it has the audio is obviously PCM mono because it's a Laserdisc with digital sound. But this does not have any of the errors of the Warner DVD Master. It doesn't have the credit errors, and it doesn't have, in this short in particular, some of the audio has defects. There's even a line of dialogue that's clipped off and obscured. This does not have that, and this is from Warner Brothers themselves and was made in 1998. So I don't know how in the intervening years between 1998 and 2006 they were using a version that had audio that sounded like it came from one of the old crappy splicey prints from a public domain VHS copy from the 1980s. But that is a really weird, interesting outlier in this sort of video saga of the Fleischer Superman cartoons, that these late release handful of Laserdiscs that have a short each have a direct print transfer, which looks really great in standard definition, and honestly just as robust as the Warner 2006 DVD Master, if not actually better. I think the color timing is done better. Doesn't seem to have been as manipulated as much, but it doesn't have the audio errors and problems. So there's the bizarre part of this video saga, that these late release Laserdiscs have a copy of a Fleischer cartoon that seems not to be messed with. So now I really need to, I'm trying to find all the other volumes and not spend an arm and a leg just because I want to get the single cartoon that's on them. So again, that brings us to the present and the new 2023 Warner Home Video Blu-ray release. Again, myself and a lot of other people were very, very leery of it being the Warner Studio label, given their history of really ruining perfectly great and perfectly fine new scans of animation titles especially. And so I wasn't expecting much, really. I wasn't expecting anything at all. All I was hoping for is at the very least they would finally correct all the audio errors, because if they were scanning the original negatives, those obviously would not have the audio errors in them, and they would be completely new work, and they wouldn't be using anything from their 2006 master. So this release arrives, and this is very difficult to discuss because the problems here are not just the fact that they have no quality control, but there is not one aspect of this release that is not a major glaring problem. To even know where to begin is really difficult. So I guess I'll start with the technical aspects of this new scan and this new presentation and what you should expect from this new release. So as I said before, the Warner press statement is that they scan the original negatives at 4K, and then they also perform the Technicolor alignment process to actually get the Technicolor elements perfectly aligned and essentially 100% perfect. Now, at this point, this should have really been all that was done, and this is what the source scan itself, when you look at this new Blu-ray release, is going to resemble on the surface. And so most people are looking at this release, if you don't have an animation background, or you don't have a film background, or you're not a videophile, or you don't have a long history with these shorts, most people are just going to think, wow, this looks fantastic, and it's in full HD now, and it looks much better, so much better than what the Blu-ray standard def extra versions looked like from that 2006 master. They're going to look perfectly fine on the surface. However, I even have trouble even saying that, because the problems are so glaring that and have actually altered the visual integrity of the original design and direction of these shorts, that I think the image has actually been degraded in that way. And what has been done is stuff that the Warner Studio label seems to do with every one of their animation releases for the most part. So it has gone through the same sort of DNR process as both Scooby-Doo and Batman the Animated Series did, for example. However, those were television animation. Television animation is not feature animation, and the Fleischer Superman cartoons had a record budget at the time, and the Fleischers were the rivals to Disney in the golden age of animation at this point, and they were technically far advanced even over Disney in certain areas. And of course, Max Fleischer had the patent for the rotoscoping process, and Dave Fleischer, directing these shorts, literally directed the absolute hell out of them in terms of not just the sense of movement, but the sense of atmosphere and ambiance, and his usage and insistence on maintaining a balance of light and shadow has led many, and very correctly, to say that these are a precursor to the film noir style, which they 100% are. So the thought of any DNR application to the Fleischer Superman cartoons is anathema. It's like, it's unthinkable. But it is not just a general, we had to use some noise reduction here and there because the scans were a bit noisy in places. DNR is usually labeled as a sort of inherently knee-jerk negative term, which unfortunately it usually is because people overuse it. But it is usually a necessary tool in general standard restoration in specific areas, particularly when you're trying to achieve and maintain a balance in a transfer. I myself would really never utilize it unless it was absolutely necessary, but that's me. However, the Warner Studio label does not view things that way, and because this is not, again, television animation is always much more limited in the time and the budget constraints. So that's why everyone looks to the Fleischer cartoons as inspiration. It was the inspiration for Batman the Animated Series, part and parcel, 100%. That was the intent, to make a Batman experience that had the spirit and the heart of the Fleischer Superman cartoons, even though they knew they would never be able to get to the animation level that the Fleischers did, because basically nobody can, and no one has that amount of budget to play around with. So these are animation legends, and the fact that they have not just been transferred straight, essentially. The DNR here is not total, obviously. There is still some green left that's fighting to come back through, but the damage has been done. Some people have even noticed there are some spots where some of the original lines have been slightly erased or obscured. It is really appalling that the studio label thought this was a good idea. So that's a gigantic red flag right there. That means that this is already compromised beyond belief. You do not do a DNR pass on the Fleischer Superman cartoons. That's just unforgivable and unthinkable. That would be bad enough. However, the problem gets compounded even further, and this is where you have to get into areas that unfortunately most reviews have not gotten into. Everybody is just focusing on the DNR. The problem gets worse because they've also done a new color timing pass. And also it seems they've maybe tried to tweak or fix one or two of the original animation errors in a spot or two, which means somebody really went in there and went to town on trying to do stuff to these shorts. But the color timing is significantly different across the board, even compared with Warner's 2006 master, and of course, obviously, when compared to the print scans on the Bosko release. It seems like they've tried to have a more natural appearance to things, but also it seems like it's almost favoring the reds of the image now. And in some places, the visual identity of the shorts have been significantly altered. The big one everyone's noticed is at the end of The Mechanical Monsters, the second short, when Superman is fighting the giant robots and they suddenly start using flamethrowers on him. Well, now in the Blu-ray release, the color timing shows the whole room to almost be sort of in a fiery glaze or glow, which none of the older versions has had. And if that wasn't bad enough, I actually noticed a color error earlier in that short. The sequence where Lois has stowed away on one of the robots that's flying through the air with the stolen jewels inside. When she almost gets thrown out and the hatch opens and she and all these jewels fall out and Superman has to catch her, essentially. She has a sort of golden brown outfit on, and that's how it is throughout the whole short. But when you see this, and you don't have to even pay that much close attention because it's right there in your face, when that shot comes up, because of this color timing, when that hatch opens, not just Lois's outfit, but her skin tones, just her entirely, and all of the jewels inside, including all these diamonds and things, are now this reddish pink because somebody wasn't paying attention, apparently. So there are a number of spots like that where this new color timing has actually introduced errors, and I don't think that a character wearing brown in a locked in a little vault with a bunch of diamonds and gold and things is suddenly going to turn pink for a shot, and that's accurate when none of the other versions have ever had that problem. That was the one that immediately jumped out to me that I noticed even just watching this, that's like, okay, I knew the color seemed a bit weird and kind of screwy in places, but yeah, there it's really screwy. So if you dig deeper, I'm sure you will find even more examples of that. But this has a brand new color timing that also serves to, along with the DNR, it really flattens the image. That's the best way I think you can explain it. It has this feeling of the visuals themselves now seem flat, and you lose quite a lot of the original dynamism of the staging visually that Dave Fleischer was going for. And this even gets into the shadow detail, because these shorts are literally like film noir Superman adventures, the way they are staged and photographed. And so every time you see the balance of light and shadow, it's totally shot. It seems flattened. It seems dulled. And this has led people to notice that when you look at one of the extras here, they have little clips from the cartoons while the talking heads are going on. And some people thought they were just the unrestored version of this scan, but actually what it is an HD version of the old DVD master. It's got the same printed and damage and the same color timing, but it's actually in HD instead of bumped down to standard def. So they look pretty solid, and they wipe the floor with the restored versions from 4K scans on the Blu-ray disc. They have so much more depth, they have more detail, even though they have noise and they have damage, and they're just the old DVD master in HD. And to be quite frank, they are 100% better than these new versions. And had this disc just been a straight HD version of the DVD master, even if they didn't bother with correcting the audio errors, which they still didn't, this would be a much better release. That's how bad this new work is, that they have really just... This is a desecration of the legacy of the importance of these shorts in animation, and it's really unforgivable. So again, while on the surface most people are going to see this and think, wow, look at the quality of this, it's in HD and stuff. If you have any knowledge of animation or these shorts in the past, or how animation should be handled, or if you've ever seen the Warner Archive do a release on Blu-ray, particularly of the Fleischer Popeye cartoons, which look pristine and look phenomenal, these should look every bit as good as those, if not better, because this was the Fleischers doing Superman for Paramount with the massive budget and shooting the works to make these as genre-defining as they are. So you have a perfect comparison right there, and this, I think, is probably the single biggest comparison now of just how bad and how incompetent the studio label is compared to the tiny archive division working in as a small cog in the giant wheel of the Warner Brothers studio system. Comparing this release of the Superman shorts to the Warner Archive release of the Popeye shorts, also from the Fleischers, is the single greatest example of the difference between a Warner Archive release made by people who actually give a damn and the studio label who does not. And this is compounded even worse by what I think is probably actually the single worst problem of this release, and that is the compression. The compression here is appallingly bad. This release is a dual-layer BD50 disc, which should give you about 46 to 47 gigabytes of storage space on, a 50 gig disc, with the remaining space taken up for other reasons, obviously. That's standard. But what the studio label likes to do with a lot of their animated releases, like they did on the Scooby-Doo cartoons, they compress those down and shove them onto single-layer BD25s, which means that they compressed the episode sizes down for no reason. Also, when they did the Blu-ray release of the new Scooby-Doo movies, that was a dual-layer disc, but the episodes were still supremely compressed down as if they were still being sized for a single-layer release, or quite possibly already being sized down for an upload to streaming services with the high compression of streaming services. Well, here what they've done is seemingly done that same thing, where all the shorts are extraordinarily small in their file size, and with the new extras and the two old standard def featurettes thrown in, the actual disc space that's being used is right around the single layer mark. So that means you've got like a whopping about 20 gigabytes or so of unused space that's just sitting there, not being used. And this is a lot of content to be on a single disc. You know, you're talking over 2 hours, or basically 2.5 hours for the 17 shorts alone. And yes, just because they range between 7 to 9 minutes for the most part, that doesn't mean you can compress the literal crap out of them and expect to get away with it. So when you look at the actual file sizes, all the shorts range between 800 megabytes and a gigabyte. But you think of any feature film that's 2.5 hours long, plus a few extras being put on a BD50 dual layer disc and then being shoved down to basically single layer size, you're going to have problems. And then why even make it a dual layer disc at all if you're going to have over 20 gigabytes of unused space? Why not use that space and have actual proper compression rates? Now, it might seem like I'm just talking about numbers, and Warner is known for doing things like this and having a massive amount of wasted space and having terrible compression. That's nothing new. But what that means on this release, in addition to the color and in addition to the DNR problems, softening the image and removing original detail that cannot be brought back or restored because of the stupidity of the DNR pass that was done, you now have compression errors all over the place, 100% through all of the shorts. They are sometimes just noise in the background, and when you have that, it blends in with the little bit of film grain that's there and trying to come through, and then it turns everything into just a noisy mess that you see throughout every single one of the shorts. And you can even pause on individual frames at random intervals, and you'll see all kinds of digital noise and things intermixing with the grain, and it's just a mess. That would be bad enough, but this also means you have compression effects that are creating essentially noise halos around objects, people, around heads and figures, and they're all over. Even when Superman is flying in the iconic flying shots, he's flying and it's almost like he's got a force field blob of just crud around him. This is extraordinarily apparent when you're watching this upscaled to 4K on an OLED television like I did. And if you sit anywhere near closer to your television, most people usually sit pretty far back, but if you sit a little bit closer or you look closer, this is going to literally sit there and jump out of the screen and hit you over the head. It's that bad. I know most people don't go into compression and compression errors and things, but this is something that is affecting even a lot of new UHD titles. But I don't know if I've ever seen a release this blatantly bad across the board. So the problem here with the compression artifacts, not only are they there, not only are they rampant, not only are they in 100% of every single one of the shorts and hideously bad when you view this upscaled to 4K, and especially when seen on an OLED where they are unmistakably there. It's so bad it almost looks like frozen grain halos, but it is not. And again, the compression artifacts are so bad and so large that they mix in with the bit of grain that's still there, and they almost start to look like a fake grain plate that sometimes people will apply when they do a really bad DNR pass, and then they try to add a bit of a fake grain plate or a standardized grain plate to try and make the image now look at least a little bit more like its original self with some definition back. That's been a practice for decades now, unfortunately. That's something that Lowry Digital used to love to do, especially back in the DVD era and getting into Blu-ray. I don't know if that was done here, but it seems like the compression artifacts and the bit of original grain that's left, they start to, again, it starts like they try to intermesh almost, and they're sort of fighting with each other, and it adds a certain kind of noise to the image that some people might just think, oh, well, that's just grain. No, it's not. These should look stupendous, and they don't, because this label is incompetent. And the compression artifacts are so bad that I think it's really actually the worst part of how the image has been treated. It's even worse than the noise, the DNR pass, and the color timing. And all three of these combined make this appalling. This is one of the worst video presentations on this format I've ever seen, because these shorts are so iconic and because they're so stupendously beautiful, even on old crap public domain transfers. And to know that these could have looked great, and to see, if you can look through all that crap, you can see that the original scan itself was great and had all this detail that we'd never seen before. And you can only imagine what it would have been like had the archive been able to handle this and done their usual exemplary work, and this could have resembled their Popeye volumes of Fleischer cartoons, which are reference pieces. This should have been a reference piece. It is not. It has horrible DNR, it has major color timing problems that seem inaccurate across the board, and it has hideous compression across the board. There is no excuse for the compression here. And again, you've got a massive amount of disk real estate that has not been used. There's no excuse that they didn't use that. All of these file sizes should at least be double the size that they are. They have the bit rates that are far too low. And again, when you view this, especially when it's upscaled to 4K, it is unmistakably there. This is an appalling video transfer. This is so bad I can't even put my feelings into words. This is visual desecration, in my opinion, and I don't think this release should be supported. I think this release should be recalled. I think Warner should be ashamed of themselves in every single case just for the visuals alone. This is the number one example I have now of they simply just don't care. That's what I gather from this, and they think that you are going to just give them, it's a bit pricier at $30. They think you're just going to fork over $30 and not notice the visual desecration that's going on. So it is not just the DNR pass. That, as horrible as that is, when you combine it's just the start of the visual problems. So all three, the color timing, the DNR, and the horrible compression, make this visually just gross. And again, on the surface, most people are not going to notice this stuff, and they don't have the references to fall back on. And especially if you're just watching in 1080p, this isn't going to be as noticeable as it is when upscaled to 4K. Or if you're projecting it, for example, you may not see a lot of stuff unless you project it very large. But for anyone with a great knowledge of these shorts or a lot of video knowledge, and especially if you're watching upscaled to 4K, this is going to be readily apparent. It is in your face, and it's insulting. It is insultingly bad. It's insulting to the Fleischers themselves and the iconic works that these cartoons are, and it's insulting to all of us who have forked over $30 for yet another Warner product that is hideously flawed. But this really takes the cake. This is one of the worst releases they've ever done, and for my money, this is the single worst release of the entire year of 2023, and the year's not even over yet. So I can't even begin to put my thoughts and feelings into words and try to maintain a sense of decorum. This is really unforgivably bad. And to all those who have already expressed the opinions that, maybe they're just going to stick with the 2006 master on the Blu-ray or DVDs, or even better if you have the standalone release, that is the way to go. This is no improvement over that master. That older master is better in every single way. Even when you upscale it to 4K, and you naturally are going to have artifacts from upscaling standard def, even on DVD, up to 4K, it's still a better visual experience. It still is maintaining the original visual stylization of the shorts at a better and proper way than this new 4K scan from original negatives. And given that this is Warner and they've treated this so badly and the audio still has problems, I doubt that it was even a negative scan, because I'd like to see some hard facts, and I'd like to see them explain their rationale for the horrible, hideous DNR application, the screwy color timing, and now the horrible compression. There is no rationale for any of that, and they can't defend it, which is why they never acknowledge any of these problems. And to be quite honest, if we're talking about upscaling, I of course was referring back to my older editions. The Bosko DVD of straight print scans is still a well-made DVD that holds up beautifully, even when upscaled to 4K. It is a better viewing experience than this new supposed 4K scan, because it has been manipulated and ruined by the Warner Studio label. Heck, I'd go even as far to say that the 1988 Image print scan master on this DVD, upscaled to 4K, is a better viewing experience, because again, neither of these have been messed with. And I think that says a lot. And then lastly about the picture, yes, they've done cleanup. Yes, the blemishes and things are gone that are on all the previous versions. Yes, there is no longer an annoying gate hair in the iconic Superman intro. That's pretty much on all the older versions as well. That doesn't matter. That's how bad this presentation is. That's how poorly these have been treated. That's how much the image has been manipulated. That the cleanup restoration work is pointless. Again, the old 2006 master with its issues in standard dev is better in every single way. And that's why everyone who sees this extra on here with the 1080p clips of the old DVD master says the same thing. It looks so much better. What happened? I'll tell you exactly what happened. The Warner Studio label and their incompetence and their continued incompetence with the practices they've established and seem to be happy with, which are completely against film preservation, really in any sense of the word. To move on to the audio, it's now presented in DTS HDMI lossless mono. Some work has been done. There is noticeably some less distortion in some of the music cues. That's pretty much on all the previous versions. There does seem like there was some hiss removal here and there. So I think in some ways they have been a little bit scrubbed compared to even what was on the Warner DVD. It's still a big patchwork of different elements. And so you're going to notice a lot of volume level discrepancy. There's a lot of still obvious, degradation from the original source, but it does seem like somebody went in there and tried to tweak it and at least work on it some, which, is appreciated that they did try to finally work on the audio again, but it's a bit heavy-handed, and anytime a studio label goes in and starts trying to improve original audio, the results are usually disastrous for fidelity. And of course, the first thing to go is dynamic range and the actual loss of the noise spectrum when they get too crazy with hiss removal and EQing. So I'm always a bit leery about stuff like that. These are going to sound obviously much clearer than even the previous Warner Master, but I'm not too big on the work they did, and I still think overall the Bosko DVD audio sounds best. And of course, it has no audio errors, because guess what? The audio errors are still here. So somehow, in spite of scanning these negatives, and supposedly you would think they would do new work, it seems like they used their DVD master as their grading reference. So all of the DVD audio errors are still here. All the credit errors are here. We do have the one fix from the standalone with the X-ray vision as speech and mechanical monsters has been fixed. So apparently they used whatever the notes were there and left everything else as is. So this new audio track has all the old problems: clipped audio, screwed up credits, screwed up closing credits, cut music, incorrect opening credits. The opening origin story that's only in the first Superman cartoon, it pops up on another 2 or 3 of the shorts at least. Why? No one knows. Some of them have the wrong version of the introduction speech. Some of them are at the wrong pitch. Some of them completely cut off. For some reason, the Jungle Drum short has its title cards sit there for like an extra 25 seconds as everything else still goes, and we missed the rest of the credits. That's still there. A lot of the original credits had special sound effects for their title cards, like $1 Billion Limited or Magnetic Telescope. Those still aren't here. So they have basically recreated all of the audio errors they never fixed, and now they're in lossless HDMI audio with additional cleanup work applied. I don't know what to say about that. I don't know how that was done, other than I guess someone just used the DVD as their base source, and then they just worked on the DVD audio. But hey, it's in lossless. You guys love lossless. Well, you can't complain. It's lossless audio. They're still screwed up. Every single short has problems. Not a single one escapes without some error or music cut off or abrupt fade out. And again, pretty much all or most of the Paramount logos for the end of each short is wrong, or they try to just reuse the same one over and over and slug it on there. And even that is cut off and abrupt. So yeah, even the logos are still screwed up for almost every single short. That's the one thing where at least a few of the shorts make it through without a problem, where the logos are actually correct. And if that wasn't bad enough, there are actually new audio errors, which just seems unbelievable, as if this release could not get any worse. There's a couple new audio errors. Only a few, really one or two, have been noticed so far in the short Showdown. But the one I noticed particularly is there's one particular moment where the imposter Superman, after he tries to shoot Superman, he chucks his gun at him. Well, when that happens, all of a sudden there's an audio dropout. He chucks the gun bounces off Superman's chest, and there's an audio dropout. That wasn't there before, so great job, Warner Brothers. You somehow managed to introduce new audio errors into the already screwed up audio that you once again did not fix. And I'm sure there's even more. There's basically one or two that are there in the Showdown short that myself and some others have noticed and already started discussing about. So this is a release you have to scrub through and go frame by frame and specifically compare with the older releases. That's how intensive you have to get with this release. And I took way too many notes that I'm not even getting really into, because there's so much to discuss in terms of these problems and how bad this release is and how unacceptable this release is and how unacceptable these practices are from the Warner Studio label, that on top of everything else, not only did they not even address the audio, they worked on the problematic audio and kind of made it better and kind of made it worse at the same time. But on top of that, they even introduced a new audio error, which we didn't have before. It's like, why did you even bother at this point? You know, is there no upside here? There really isn't. Because on top of everything, all the credits are still screwed up. All the end credits are still screwed up. All the audio errors are still there. And now we have at least one or two new audio errors. So, I don't know what they're doing. I really don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what their processing is. And they have zero quality control. Zero. If they even had one tiny scrap of quality control, this release would not be the way it is. But this is how it stands, and the Warner Studio label has zero quality control. So that brings us to the overall packaging and design of this release. This is a single BD50, as I said before, in a standard Blu-ray Amaray case. They have new artwork, which of course is once again using the artwork from the 2009 standalone release. It is the same. This is the same image used for the very generic static menu. It seems like someone has tried to give this a sort of Golden Age comic flavor, which is nice, but it's still very generic. It's still just a standard Amaray case, and it doesn't really make you think your hard-earned $30 is well spent, because again, this is $30 at list retail price, so it's more expensive than your standard single-disc Blu-ray title from the Warner Studio label. The rear carries over the same design idea. You know, it's on the generic side, but it's also seemingly very similar to a lot of Warner animation releases. So the new artwork is okay. It's rather uninspired, but at least somebody seems to have taken 5 minutes to try and give it some Golden Age flavor. Another unexpected touch is there's actually interior artwork. This was really unexpected because I'm not used to seeing this on a Warner release, and I guess they did this in lieu of having an actual booklet with the individual shorts listed. So you open the case to see a shot of the Fleischer Superman, and then the shorts listed in chronological order, broken up by the Fleischer and Famous Studio shorts, and then a list of the couple extras. However, as you can see, this is inside of an eco case, so obviously you can't read them very clearly without taking the art out, so that kind of defeats the purpose. However, this was unexpected. This is a nicer touch, and it makes you think that the disc contents are going to be actually something a bit special, because these are truly special and one-of-a-kind, unique masterworks of all of animation, and Warner Brothers does not often do interior artwork, actually hardly ever, so they at least did that. So again, whoever was in charge of the art seems to have put in, a little bit of extra time. The same cannot be said for the disc label, which is generic, but at least it has the Superman logo on it. But no artwork, and they've given it this sort of maroon color, which I guess is done to sort of match the maroon of the art. But yeah, if they spent the extra time to give it interior art, I don't know why they wouldn't at least, put some art on the label instead of just it's a maroon generic label. And then for such iconic animation, we do have some extras. The original 2 standard def supplements from the DVD releases are carried over here, which is, of course, The Man, the Myth, Superman, which is about the origin of the sort of heroic ideal. And then the other, the most important one, is the First Flight, the Fleischer Superman series, where you have a lot of animation luminaries and animation historians talk and wax poetic about the majestic quality of the Fleischer cartoons and how they have influenced basically every animator since 1941, and just how important and iconic these are. And it also goes into some of the history of the Fleischer studios, both Max and Dave Fleischer and Sammy Timberg's music, and how the Fleischers broke up and it became famous studios and what that meant for the shorts and things. So it is the best overall piece. It goes into the history of the shorts, their importance, and talks about the key and notable personnel and how the shorts even came to be. The one new extra that they hype up for this release is entitled Max Fleischer's Superman Speeding Toward Tomorrow. This is a 13-minute fluff piece with a couple random talking heads. It serves no purpose. It has no new information. They simply kind of reflect on how cool and great they think the animation is and kind of what it looks like today. And there's no information about the Fleischers. They don't talk about any of the historical background. They don't talk about the 2 different studios and what that means for the different differences created in the shorts halfway through the run. This serves no purpose. It's just a 13-minute fluff piece. The only thing it does do is it has clips from the actual cartoons from the DVD master in HD. And again, this is where people are seeing these clips and suddenly going, wait, that looks fantastic. That looks better than the actual shorts on the Blu-ray. What's going on? And at first, some people thought they were just the raw scans. But again, they are HD versions of the DVD master. But even seen in these short little tiny bits in between these talking heads, they're noticeably better in short bursts even. And on top of that, this short is cut and edited in the same way as all of the modern DCAU Blu-ray extras and things, where there's this really loud, overbearing modern music that overwhelms even the dialogue and is way out of place and is very annoying and runs through the entirety of the featurette, which again is only 13 minutes and has zero new or valuable information. So really, this new extra is worthless. Don't bother with it except for getting the clips of the DVD master in HD, which is the one notable thing here on this release where you can actually see how the shorts are actually supposed to look, or at least something much more approximating how they're supposed to look. And this is what everyone is sort of discussing online that they're seeing on this disc and comparing it to the same shorts on the so-called 4K restored scans. And you can see just how badly these iconic legendary works of animation have been desecrated by the Warner Studio label on the same disc. So overall, to summarize all of that, this is an appalling release. This is a release that should be recalled. Warner should be ashamed of themselves. The picture and sound errors are inexcusable. They've had almost 20 years now to fix the audio errors that they themselves caused. They have not done so still, and now they've added at least another 1 or 2 to those. Again, it's been 17 years they've had to fix the audio errors. They have done other releases and other reissues of the same shorts in terms of the masters. They could have fixed them at any time. They don't seem to care. And now they've reused that and tweaked it further and again added another error or 2. Still having the audio errors would be bad enough, but the treatment of the actual picture of the shorts is beyond appalling. It is not just a terrible DNR pass, but in addition to that, there is this new color timing and the hideous compression artifacts that now make the iconic Fleischer Superman shorts look flat and dull. And those are 2 words that should never be in the same sentence as the Fleischer Superman cartoons. The overall visual presentation quality is so poor that it is completely outdone by the 2009 DVD standalone of their old master, the 2006 masters on the DVDs and Blu-rays in standard definition, and of course also, I would argue, the Bosko DVD and Image DVD of direct print scans from the DVDs in the very early 2000s. And once again, if you want a perfectly accurate representation of these original cartoons without any audio errors, your best bet is still having the old Bosko DVD. So what I always recommend people to do, if they love these cartoons as much as I do, and as much as all Superman fans do, and as much as all animation fans do, and as much as anyone should, I really think it's best to have both the Bosko DVD and then the 2009 standalone release. So that way you have the best of both, essentially. And also, if you want to have the Bosko audio and not have the audio errors, but also you want the picture quality of the Warner DVD master, that's when you turn to the mild-mannered edition, which is the fan effort that essentially combined those plus another source or two to try and create something with the Warner master that didn't have all of the audio errors and other errors and glitches that they caused. Again, those are available here on YouTube as well, and I will link to those in the description. And to be quite honest, that remains the single best simple way to see these. If you're new to these, that's what I always direct people towards, because trying to explain any of this is very confusing. and then trying to explain the importance of the older editions and talk about color timing and the audio errors and things, most people are not going to get into that. So that makes this new Blu-ray even worse, because most people are going to pick this up, including people who have never seen these before, and they're going to see this bastardized and extremely compromised presentation. Again, you can see the quality of the new scan itself underlying all of these problems was great, and that's going to lead most people to just say, oh, well, this is perfectly fine. What are you going on about? It looks great. They'd never looked this clean or this good before. If you look anywhere under past the surface image in terms of the surface impact of what you're getting, if you're just watching these in passing or you're not watching them critically, you can't escape the massive problems. And I would encourage anyone who has not looked at or thought of this or just picked up the disc, period, watch some of these new restored shorts and then go to the new 13 minutes piece and wait for some of those clips of the old DVD master to pop up. And immediately, even in those little bursts of an old 2006 scan in HD, you're going to notice such an incredible difference, even though those themselves are not perfect, that it really does wipe the floor with, again, these so-called restorations. And I use air quotes because these are not restorations. These are bastardizations. These are desecrations. And I want to stress that, because the combination of the DNR usage, the color timing, and the horrible compression make this really unwatchable, especially when upscaled to 4K. This is really horrible, and you can't escape any of these problems. This is, without question, a new low, even for the Warner Studio label. That's how bad this is. They should be ashamed of themselves. This makes their issues and problems with the Superman film series 4K UHD release look like nothing. And if you saw my video on that, I kind of got hot and bothered about that, but that doesn't even begin to compare, because there is no positive to this release at all. The new extra is worthless, except for the clips of the old master in HD. The picture quality is atrocious. The audio still has the same problems and has been tweaked further and has new problems. The art is rather generic. The list price is kind of high on top of all of that, and they expect people to, again, shell out $30 for this type of release that is compromised on all fronts. And if that wasn't bad enough, you have hideous compression and a massive amount of disk space that's just sitting there unused for zero reason at all. I would sincerely love to hear the Warner Studio label try to explain any of these decisions, because they're indefensible. There is no reason for any of this. There is no reason why any of this had to occur. All you really had to do was take the new raw scans, perform maybe a little bit of color balancing here and there, and of course repair any damage in them, and that's it. You know, you're actually having to pay people more to desecrate the original works. You're having to pay people more to figure out how to compress them down this much and then leave a whopping 20 gigs of space on the disc unused. And it just doesn't make any sense. They're actually making things harder by not taking the time to do the work properly in the first place. And how in the heck original negative scans still have the same compromised audio with all the errors from their DVD master? Now, that doesn't make any sense other than the fact that it seems like they didn't actually do any new audio harvesting and just used the DVD source audio, and in the process of tweaking that, created new errors. So this is no upgrade. I would not recommend this release to anyone. I think this should be recalled. I think this is one of the worst discs that the Warner label has ever released. I think this is one of the worst Blu-rays ever made. And I do think this is the single worst disc of the calendar year of 2023. And it's only May. That's how bad this is. Again, on top of everything, Warner has had 17 years now to fix the audio errors they caused back in 2006. That hasn't even been done. But the treatment of these cartoons, which really are the pinnacle of animation, of film animation, and the greatest, most popular, lasting legacy of the Fleischer Studios and their pioneering work, that generation after generation of Superman fans, comics fans, animation fans, and actual animation professionals themselves have on this pedestal and look up to. I mean, these have inspired generations of animators to even go into the animation field themselves. I mean, without these, there would be so much of animation that simply wouldn't exist because of how influential these cartoons are. They're not just cartoons, they're works of art. And they are still, for me and a lot of other people, the definitive adaptation of the Man of Steel himself that perfectly encapsulate the golden age era original Superman of Siegel and Schuster into a visual medium and make the comic panels come to life in a way that no one else has ever achieved to the same degree. So for the Warner Studio label to show such an appalling lack of care for these iconic treasures that have still never been given the proper treatment on home video and the proper restoration they have always deserved is unforgivable. This is appalling in every single aspect. I would advise strongly, wholeheartedly, if you're even considering this as a purchase, it is a very, very tough sell. If you want to see what the source scan maybe would have been like, you can pick up this release and try to look through all of the horrible treatment that has been applied to it. But again, this is a new low, even for the Warner Studio label. It makes the problems that were on the Scooby-Doo release and even the Batman the Animated Series release look like nothing. Because again, these are the Fleischer Superman cartoons. These are one of the animation titles in the pantheon of legendary animation. No, this isn't, say, as technically bad as the horrible Disney revisionism of the beloved golden age of Disney animated classics that have been degrained and reanimated and recolored and remixed in their audio to within an inch of their life and totally torn apart and destroyed. But it's getting pretty darn close. Like, this starts to approach Disney level of desecration of iconic classic animation works, and that really takes a lot for even me to say that, because that's how bad this is. And I wanted to try and cover every detail in this review as much as possible, because I want people to actually think about whether they want to purchase this or not, because I would strongly advise that no one purchases this, because there is no upshot or positive here other than on the surface this looks cleaner than it's ever looked before. But I mean, if you want to see just how badly animation can be treated by the Warner Studio label, then by all means you can pick this up. But I would say definitely for the diehard Fleischer Superman fans, maybe wait for this to go on sale or pick it up used, but don't support this kind of desecration. This is desecration. This is the worst release of 2023, because it's so inexcusable. There's no reason any of these problems had to exist. And had this been done by the Warner Archive, I would not be talking about any of this. There would be no DNR problem. There would be no color timing problem. They would not have let the audio errors go through without fixing them. And on top of that, they were going to do this, but the studio label once again swept in and said, no, we're doing this, and you can't have it. So all the planning they must have done and all the work they would have put into it didn't happen. And this, I think, is now the single greatest example of how incompetent the studio label is compared to the small archive division within the Warner umbrella. This should have been a Warner Archive release. They would have done the job right. That didn't happen because of the studio label, and the studio label screwed it up. It's as plain as that. And it hurts terribly because it's the Fleischer Superman cartoons, and because they've been kicked around on home video for decades, since the start of home video, and because of their public domain status, it's been such really a rare treat to even get one slightly better official release after another. But then, from 2006 onward, we're talking 17 years now of screwy Warner editions with screwy problems that are all because of a lack of research and a lack of quality control. Well, now that has just gone into the stratosphere. This is one of the worst Blu-rays ever made. Do not purchase this. Do not support this. This should be recalled. And once again, to be completely honest, Warner, you should be ashamed of yourselves. This is just unfathomable. The treatment that has been given to the iconic, legendary Fleischer Superman cartoons. This is pointless. It's pointless. As others have already said, just stick with your older releases. Again, I would say check out the mild-mannered edition, a fan effort that combines the audio and video of the Warner and Bosko releases. And if you want editions for your physical library, I would definitely say get the 2009 Superman standalone DVD release from Warner and the original Bosko Diamond Anniversary Edition DVD to have the best of both masters, which still both have issues of their own, obviously, but that's as good as you can do in the physical media realm. And with that, I know that was extraordinarily negative and not something that anybody wanted to hear, but to say that this is one of the most disappointing video releases I've ever encountered is an understatement. I've hoped for a definitive release of the Fleischer Superman cartoons ever since I was a little kid, before I even knew anything about home video. And I just had piles of public domain VHS tapes of dubious quality, just trying to even see all of these legendary shorts, which are life-changing works of animation and have influenced generation after generation of people to even go into the animation industry. And for them to be treated this poorly and this badly by the Warner Studio label is unforgivable. So, as always, I hope my babblings about physical media releases and classic films has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I don't know necessarily about the fun part with this particular review, but I really had to just put all my thoughts out there because I expected it to be bad, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. This is unforgivable. This should be recalled. This should have never been issued in this state. That's how appalling this release is. And quite frankly, it is the worst disc of the year because they've had almost 20 years now to do this right in terms of modern home video, and they still can't. And now they have just run the gamut, and about every problem that they could possibly cause, they did it. There's no positive here. There's no win here, and I would strongly advise people to just avoid this release unless you're really curious. Then again, maybe pick it up on sale at a super discount or buy it used. This is the worst release of the year. This is unforgivable. This is a studio label that simply does not care. And again, they should be ashamed of themselves. And to close on a positive note, maybe somebody might listen to all of us talking about these massive problems and how bad this release is, and maybe decide to do something about it. Or maybe perhaps let the Warner Archive take over and do the work as they should have been allowed to in the first place, and seemed like they were going to get to before the studio label stepped in and ruined all of that. So hopefully we can maybe eventually someday in the near future get a proper, definitive release and restoration of the iconic Fleischer Superman cartoons. But until then, I would say stick with the Warner DVD and the Bosko DVD. And as I always say to close out my reviews, please do keep supporting both studio, though not necessarily Warner Studio label releases, and boutique label releases, because they do need your support. They need all the help they can get. And not everyone is the Warner Studio label. There are a lot of people that care, some seemingly more than others. Some labels do better work than others, but they do need your support to help keep both physical media and film culture alive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.
Congratulations, Lois. That was a terrific story.
Thanks, Chief. It was all due to the Warner Studio label.